Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
I spoke with our next guest on this programme back in October of 2014. I don't think he's overly sentimental. I think he is when he's dealing with parents and young women whom are threatened with losing their children. I think he's got all the compassion in the world. But I don't think he gets very sentimental about what it is that he does. He's a law graduate of Oxford University. He runs a website called forced-adoption.com, which is a marvellous resource of information about the forced adoption scandal, about the thousands and thousands of children who are taken away from their parents every year at birth. Sometimes, in fact, most of the time, for very, very, dodgy. Let's use the word dodgy reasons. He's been an absolute light in the dark for so many people. Our producer, Claire Calvi, has been in touch with him to tell him a little bit about the story that we've been covering on the show, the story of Leon and Yolanda. Yolanda's the Portuguese woman, of course. Leon is British, and their loss of their child in February this year. They've last seen him on the 4th of March. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the programme live from France. So it's getting late on in the evening there, Ian Josephs. Ian, thanks so much for giving us your time again. How have you been since we last spoke?
Well, I would say that things have got worse in most respects rather than better, except that you've got a more understanding president of the family courts in Sir James Mumby, who is quietly doing his best to try and water down the strictures that are put by other judges on parents. But he may be the president, but he's not got all that much power. But what he has laid down is that adoption is a last resort when nothing else will do. That is supposed to be the law, but in fact the judges just do not take much notice of that because they rarely demonstrate that. The children can go to not just to parents but to grandparents or other kin such as uncles, aunts, and brothers or sisters of the parents, but the social workers rarely look at that. Why has all this happened in the UK? It's a good question. So I'd like to just sort of explain what has happened and then why it's happened and
Brilliant.
Then how can we stop it.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. What has happened is a terrible thing. The UK is the only country in the world, I repeat, the only country in the world in 2 or 3 respects. It's the only country in the world where babies are taken at birth for risk of emotional abuse. This means that somebody with a crystal ball says that in future they think one of the parents might upset the child emotionally. I mean, this is an impossible thing to defend because if a parent does defend it, they call in an expert who says, yes, you're going to abuse your child in the future. And the judge says, well, look, he's qualified, he's got all sorts of degrees, and it's a profession. What do you know? You're half-educated. I've got to believe him. And the child goes. So, no, other countries do take children. In the United States, they take quite a few, but not for risk of emotional abuse at birth. And I think that if you want to predict the future, you should go to Gypsy Rose Lee in her fairground tent with her crystal ball, because she's been doing it all her life and probably has a shrewd idea of how to size people up and guess their future. But judges and social workers, and they have got no training to do that and shouldn't even try. So that's the first thing, one of the first things and one of the worst things. Another thing is that parents and children are legally gagged. The parents can't complain. If a mother has her child taken, she can't rush out to the newspapers or hold a public meeting and saying, look, my child, little Willie, has been taken from me, because she'd be clapped in jail. According to Harriet Harman, who was the last Home Secretary to release any figures, none have been released since, over 200 parents are jailed just for complaining when their children are taken and complaining publicly. Worse still, on contact, and you'll find this hard to believe, on contact, when the parents eventually contact their children, it's the most terrible treatment you can think of. These children, when they're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, those sort of ages, where they can be fetched by the police and taken screaming from their parents' home, and then their mobile phones are taken, their laptops are taken, they are isolated from family and friends. They're not only taken from their family, they're isolated from everybody they knew, from relatives, aunts, uncles, grandparents. They are put in quarantine, and they've done nothing wrong. And then they can't phone out. When eventually the parents come, you'll find this again hard to believe, but it's true, if they're foreign children, they're still not allowed to speak to their own parents when they visit in a foreign language. They have to use broken English, even if it's not their natural language. And that is because the social workers want to know what they're saying, because they mustn't discuss their case, they mustn't say they want to go home, they mustn't complain of abuse by fosterers. So these kids are gagged, as are their parents. Compare this with the treatment given to Myra Hindley, Dr. Shipman, Peter Sutcliffe, all those serial killers. When they're in jail, they can phone out to people, and when their visitors come, they can discuss their case and anything they like. So these children who've done nothing are treated worse than the very worst murderers and serial killers that can be found in the country. And that's a terrible thing.
I've got loads. Just before you get to the next thing, this is the third or fourth time you've been on the programme. Our listeners, whom are really interested in this, they love you and what you've done. And I've spoken to so many of these parents in the last 12 months that the programme has kind of gotten a bit of a reputation for allowing these parents come on it and say what it is that's happened to them. So there's a number of questions from our listeners, and they're incredulous, Ian. We're talking about listeners here who have never experienced this, and they're saying, are you seriously telling us that the social workers can present evidence to a judge, evidence that they might have sexed up or doctored or exaggerated, and the accused parent doesn't get to see that evidence and contest it? Is that right, Ian?
Oh, that is right. I mean, the trouble is that social workers were set up to try and support families and keep them together. What they are doing is split them up and destroy them. And why is that? Well, I mean, in some ways, social workers are only human after all. When they have a case and they think the child should be removed and the parents want to keep the child, they're adversaries. It's war to the death. They fight each other in court. And, of course, the social workers want to win their cases in court. They want to win, which means defeating parents. So now it's got to the stage where if, for example, you were living next door to a single mother with a couple of kids, and you told her, oh, by the way, while you were out, a social worker came to see you. She wouldn't say, oh, what a pity I missed her. She would say, oh, my God, they're after my killed children. That's the state where social workers have got to. And Maggie Mellon herself, the vice chair of the Association of Social Workers, has said that it's a climate of fear, that they've gone too far to so-called protection instead of support, and that in 30 or 40 years' time, and this is the social worker, chief social worker talking, we may look back in horror, just as we look back now 50 years ago when all those children were sent to Australia to the Christian Brothers to be abused and worked to death. And we thought we were doing the right thing, or the people who did it thought they were doing the right thing. She's saying that we might look back on now in the same way and say, how could they have behaved like this? Because there's nothing more dangerous than a bunch of do-gooders, because they think they're doing the right thing, but they're not necessarily, just because they think they are.
You, by the way, sorry to interrupt you again. You have, I mean, folks, go to forced-adoption.com, because all the information is on there about how much of an industry this is in terms of the money. It's massive, right? Ian, the tweets are flying in, and there's some very good questions there. And despite us having 40 minutes, it's going to fly by. I just want to put this to you. A number of our listeners are based in Scotland, and they said, does Ian have any thoughts on the Named Person Act, which comes in Scotland in August? And that basically, for the listeners who don't understand, the Scottish have passed and will introduce into law that every child in the country, every single child, will have a named person, like a guardian, named by the state. Could be a teacher, could be a social worker, could be a doctor, could be somebody in religion or whatever. A lot of people are very sceptical about this, Ian, saying that this is beyond nanny state, and what it might be is it might be making it easier for the state to take children in Scotland. What do you say to that?
Well, they're absolutely right. I mean, it's a disgrace. They want to say that every child should have some Gestapo person looking over them and do the German Hitler's Lebensraum, take them away if they're not brought up in exactly the way that social workers think. I mean, you get social workers complaining that they have too many toys, too few toys, that they're let up to watch Coronation Street or something late at night when they shouldn't be, and yet you come to France and you can see kids of 3, 4 and 5 up at midnight when there's a fete on, and they just sleep in the next day. It's this idea that of conformity. It's almost like it's communism in more than fascism, to tell the truth. It's in the way that it is, because if you think that social workers a load of scumbags should be locked up, then you must have a personality disorder, is what they say. You know, if you don't think they're good, then there's something wrong with you, and they try and find mental problems with people. And why is all this? Because it's the money at the bottom of it. These, as you said, there are not just millions, but billions of pounds concerned. The biggest robbers are the agencies who supply addresses of social workers, of families who will be host families, who will be fosterers, and they will supply possible adoptive parents. They get big commissions. They get £27,000 when someone's adopted, and they get, let's say, about £2,000 a week for anyone they get fostered, and they give the foster about 500 or 600 and keep the rest. So there are millions of pounds of profits, which are quite public. They're on my website, and you can see how much, and the directors have six-figure salaries. So they don't want to change the system, nor do the people who run the so-called care homes, which charge the council £3,000 to £4,000 a week, which is at least 3 times what it costs to send Prince Harry to Eton, with none of the facilities of a big school like that.
Wow.
In fact, I mean, there's so much money in it, and most of these places are run by ex-social workers. So if their mates recommend them, people, customers as it were, they get commissions. And that's hard to prove, but I did prove it once. But it was a sad story when this girl of 12 stole the bank statements from her fosterer, and the fosterer was getting just over £400 a week to keep her, and she found on the bank statements that the social worker was getting £200 a week regularly out of it, debited from that account. That was taken before a judge who told the father, that proves that you've trained your girl to be a thief. It's a disgrace. I confiscate this. If you ever talk about it to anybody again or give away any names, you'll all go to jail. That was the cover-up, but it shows that they do get kickbacks, these social workers, for recommendations and that's why they sometimes take children, say, who are in one county and send them fostering 100 miles away because they're getting a good kickback from the agency. I'm afraid it's a corrupt society. Judges will sometimes try and ridicule people and say, oh, do you really think there's a conspiracy between me, the judge, and the guardians, the social workers, the expert psychologists, and the CAFCAS, all these people conspiring? And the answer to that is simple, of course. I never say there's a conspiracy. There's no need for a conspiracy. When our wonderful MPs decided to fiddle their expenses, no one suggested that 600 of them got in a room and said, let's work out how we can fiddle. There was no conspiracy. They all did it individually, snouts in the trough. So much worse is it in this case. They're all out individually. Some make a very good living. Some make huge profits. Something has got to...
Sorry, Ian, what's remarkable, I remember vividly our first conversation, because I'd only just spoken with Emma Ibbitson, who made the film Traffic, and Traffic 2 is about to come out, and her own story is horrendous. And I remember feeling so useless as a journalist and as a producer, not knowing that any of this was going on under my nose. I couldn't believe I lived in a country that would stand over that, where parents could be told, you're a risk of future harm to your child, therefore we're going to remove your child, and so much money would be involved. I couldn't believe it, Ian. Even after speaking with you, I went away and I cross-referenced everything on your website as best as I could, and I sat there one afternoon with my mouse on the floor and I went, Jesus Christ, Joseph's is on the money. This is the biggest scandal that hasn't broken in the media, in the mainstream media of all time, Ian. This should be on the lips. It should be spoken about at the dinner tables of every house in this country. What is going on?
Well, I can tell you that on the financial side, Christopher Booker, in his column, will be writing this in the Sunday Telegraph this coming Sunday, quite a big article exposing the money that's being made out of these poor children who are being taken. I mean, it's the only country in the world also, no other country this happens, where a steady stream of mothers who are pregnant leave the country in a hurry to have their babies in Ireland, in France, in Italy, anywhere but the UK, so that at least they don't get taken at birth. Even if they get taken for one reason or another, they're not going to get adopted, because adoption is so final. They never know whether the child is alive or dead once the child is gone, unless they can find them somehow through Facebook when they're older.
There are two big questions. Yeah, and of course, when the child turns 18, I did say to you when we spoke before that maybe in the future the state might be looking at, never-ending lawsuits from children who've turned 18 and find out what happened. But I want to ask you, we're 25 minutes past the hour and the next 20 minutes is going to fly by. So there are a couple of things I want to get into. We do want to talk about solutions. A number of women have contacted the programme to ask you, number one, what can be done about it? And number two, when should a mother up sticks and flee the country? But we'll get to that in a minute, because I want to talk about Yolanda and Leonardo Edwards. That's Yolanda Souza and Leonardo Edwards. They had a natural birthing pool birth at home, and they decided to have that at home. They used an NHS midwife. The midwife came. There were some problems with the midwife. The midwife being there didn't want to be there. When Yolanda bled quite a bit, she didn't want to accompany him to the hospital. At the hospital, they were reticent in giving a name to the baby so that the birth cert could be signed. They said they weren't ready yet. They hadn't, got a name. They were made feel a bit uncomfortable at the hospital. When they took the child home, the day the child was taken home, the social workers were knocking on the door. The midwife, we want access to the child to see how the child is. They said, look, we're knackered, we're shattered, it's been a difficult couple of days. We'll take the child for a checkup under our own steam at some stage. Things kind of went downhill from there. They were asked to come to the hospital. They went to the hospital. The hospital said, the baby has jaundice and you've not done anything about it. You're not taking care of your baby. And the upshot of it was, Ian, and I checked all of this information before I left them come on the air, they haven't seen their child since the 4th of March. Now, this is absolutely true. Now, Leon did dabble in alternative medicine and nothing that's illegal or that's ever been declared illegal. She's a cardiophysiologist. She's Portuguese. His, alternative medicine business had nothing to do with anything. And they've just not seen their child since the 4th of March, and she is going around the bend with despair and with misery. It's driving him to distraction as well. They've gone to Portugal to seek some sort of support from the Portuguese authorities. I think they've come back since then. It's an absolute nightmare. Has the horse bolted at this stage for them? Are they doomed, or is there anything they can do, do you think?
They're going all the wrong things. They've got to fight every step of the way. I don't know on what grounds the judge took the child. It doesn't matter what the social workers say. What matters is what the judge says. And if he gives an interim care order, he has to show that the child has passed the threshold of harm. Now, I don't know whether that child passed that threshold of harm, whether there was an interim care order, whether they signed a Section 20 under pressure, which is voluntary care, because some people do. They're told, you sign this or else you lose your children, and they sign their children away.
I can't quote you, Ian.
I-
I can't quote the judge. The judge said he, Santiago, the baby, they're under a gagging order, but they don't care.
Are they under a gagging order? What sort of a gagging order? Because people say these things, and sometimes it's not so.
Yeah, they believe that they've been instructed never to speak about it to anybody, certainly not go to the media.
They believe that, but have they been served with something in writing saying you must not tell anybody?
I think they have, because I put this to them on the programme, and they said they have. Let me read this, and I'll shut up and get out of your way.
Yeah.
He has been removed, this is a quote from the judge, he's been removed from the care of his parents because there was reasonable grounds for believing he was likely to suffer significant harm. It is important to stress... Likely to.
Stop there. You see the word likely. That means he hasn't suffered any harm so far, right?
No harm. No, he hasn't, no. And it goes on to say... it is important to stress, however, that no court has made any findings on those local authority allegations. And it continues, I implore these parents to think again, to put their baby's interests first and come back and cooperate so that the court can make the right decision about Santiago. There is a real danger that by continuing with their current internet campaign, they will only achieve the very thing they profess to be trying to avoid, permanent separation from their son. That's incredible.
I didn't catch that bit. You said by continuing. Did you say with their internet cafe?
With their internet campaign, because they've
campaign. Oh, I see. Yeah.
They've been basically threatened.
So what the judge says is, I don't like your politics. I don't like the way you think. So I'll take your child.
Yeah.
Because
in essence,
I mean, if anyone who campaigns to change the law risks losing their children, is that what the judge is saying? Sounds like it, doesn't it?
And I read that and I heard that exactly the same as you did. And
yeah,
can we? I mean, it's difficult to talk about their case. It's not too difficult. They should go immediately to court and ask for contact. Right? Put in were they represented or did they represent themselves? They represented themselves. They were taking some advice from a guy in America, whom I don't really have any interest in because he's not licensed to act here. He has no qualifications, and this happens sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, well, they're better off representing themselves because most of the legal aid solicitors say go along with social services, don't fight them, and if you go along with your enemies and don't fight them, you lose everything. So, I mean, their best bet is to make an application for contact immediately, and that'll put them back in court again, and they can query the law on this because it sounds to me as though allegations were made, but probably not by people who came to court. There were probably reports from social workers and people like that. And again, the law says that hearsay is admissible in a family court. That's testimony from a witness who's not in court. But it should not take preference over somebody who is in court, which is what they were. And I think they've got a good chance of appeal on that grounds if that's what happens. And it's very often that does happen. So they should put in an appeal first on the judge's decision. He's found no facts. He has found that they have not ever harmed that child. So he's only on his reading of tea leaves or crystal ball is taking away this child. And it should be, I mean, the main plank of the campaign that I try, and I don't say lead, but I go along with people, is that the law should be changed so that no child is taken unless a parent has committed a crime against children, a significant crime, not necessarily their own children. I mean, if he's interfered with some other little girl from somewhere else, but not to persecute law-abiding citizens. But we have in this country, like every country, we have laws. If you break them, you're punished. Fair enough. That's civilization. But what's the sense in having laws if you say, right, I'll keep all the laws, and the judge says, well, you've kept all the law, but I'll still punish you for there. Because that's what it is.
That's what it is.
Law-abiding citizens, and that would be the main change. It would change everything if they couldn't take a child unless a parent or somebody in charge had been convicted of a crime against children. You might say, well, yeah, well, if you see someone beating up a child and he's not been convicted yet, yeah, well, you can take away a child, and while the parent is being charged, it can be kept in care. But as soon as if the parent is found not guilty, as often happens, then the child should be given back. At the moment, the parent is found not guilty because of a metaphyseal fracture or something, because it could be happened by bone disease. Nevertheless, the family court says, well, the criminal court found you not guilty, but we think you are because on the balance of probabilities, 51%. So we're still keeping your child. That is wrong. It should be, if you penalise people, the worst punishment you can give a woman who's carried the child for 9 months is to take it away the same day it's born. I mean, there have been cases where they've come into the operating room. I've had mothers complain they came in while birth was going on, while the head was just sticking out, telling the doctors to hurry up. And even offering to cut the cord,
to take the child away. They're in that much of a hurry to take the baby.
Oh yeah, there's one on my site like that. They come in. I mean, and no stranger should be allowed in because it's not the most dignified position for a mother to be in as she gives birth. That's a minor thing compared with the enormity of taking babies away. Now, some people will say, well, all these people who help, how do you know they're worth helping? Well, the ones if I aid financially, are only pregnant mothers who can prove that the social worker's threatening to take their baby at birth. Well, I say no matter what the mother's done in her past, no one deserves to have the baby taken away the same day it's born. Nobody. And therefore, I've no conscience about helping somebody go to another country, especially as I always tell them to notify the social workers in Ireland or France when they get there so they can give their story first before they're tracked down by the British ones. So the British ones don't trust the social workers in any other country. They talk about risk of flight, for a pregnant woman. But luckily, she's committing no offence by leaving while she's pregnant. As for other people I help, well, even Dr. Shipman, Marlene Hindley, and Peter Sutcliffe and the serial killers had barristers who pleaded their cause, gave them advice, and I give advice to anyone who asks me. I mean, but nearly all the people who ring up say, I've got no criminal record, I haven't broken any laws, why are they taking my child? That's 9 out of 10, that's the case.
This is staggering stuff, Ian. It's staggering. Every time I hear this, can I just I want to mention, by the way, forced-adoption.com is Ian's website. Massive amount of tweets coming in on this. Sean says this is effing blood-boiling stuff. Zana is in New Zealand listing. She's absolutely horrified and appalled. Hubertes on Twitter says, legal is not lawful. They are different things. Laws are written by perverts for perverts, he says. He means people who would pervert justice. JP asks the question, could parents before a child is born denounce themselves from the Crown and under social contract stop any action before it happens? I don't know, JP. Maybe Ian does, but I do want to move to a question that was asked by a number of women.
Yeah.
And it's a heartbreak. I mean, heartbreaks. I really mean that. I'm not just saying this. I get very emotional even thinking about this. When should a woman who is pregnant, who has been contacted by social services and spoken to, when should she decide to get the hell out of Dodge? I can't even believe, Ian, I'm asking a question like that of a guest. But I am. There you are.
She should do that if she can. But I always tell them, don't go if you can't support yourself, because you don't get benefits like all the people coming over from Calais. You don't get benefits if you land in Ireland or France, so that you've got to have a partner or family who will help you, or you've got a good job or something. But given that, if they know how they're going to support themselves, and I've got contacts over there who will help them, but not pay for them. If they can do that, then as soon as they get a letter or as soon as the social worker says, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to take your baby at birth, that's the time to go, because it's not worth staying and risking having a baby taken. If you can go, you should go. And, I mean, people say, well, what can you do to try and stop all this? Well, there's only one way. Changes are brought about in the UK by members of Parliament. And members of Parliament have surgeries. If everyone listening to your programme goes to the surgery where members of Parliament once a month meet people who live in a constituency and doesn't plead a particular case because they say we can't deal with particular cases, right, you say, why can't the law be changed so that only people who break the law are punished, so that only people who break the law have their babies and children taken? At least that would cut 90% of the injustices. If they lobby their members of parliament and write to newspapers, because some people say, well, go in a crowd in the street, but mob rule doesn't change anything. Unless you've got thousands and thousands, and you never get thousands and thousands. Most of the people, the parents, are scared stiff of the social workers and people anyway. But they're not. They wouldn't be scared of going individually to members of parliament or writing letters to newspapers. And that's the only way to change things. Publicity is what they're frightened of. And so the more cases that get public, the better. I mean, Charles Dickens probably helped to change the way that children were brought up. And not exploited so much in factories and up chimneys and things like that. But often people forget what is considered good law one minute is bad the next. For one glaring example, is that when I was young, one of my best friends was gay. But when I was young, it was illegal for him to have any relationship with anybody, and he was frightened of the police. Now the pendulum swung right the way. So that if you criticize someone for being gay, you're the one that gets arrested. The law can change completely. All those people who thought they would put gays in prison if they caught them out, the queers they were called then, they thought they were doing the right thing. Now people think they're doing the right thing, and I think it's swung too far. But you can't. If somebody reads a passage from the Bible, I don't believe in it. But if they read out that people go to hell for, they should be free to do so. It swung the other way.
Yeah, political correctness has gone mad. There's no two ways about that. I was going to read out some more tweets. Ian Josephs is on the line. We've got Ian for another 5 or 6 minutes. That's how quick time has flown by. It's at Richie Allen Show, and it's richie@richieallen.co.uk. This is very, very serious, this next question. What we're seeing, Ian, in Europe, and we're seeing it in the United States as well, is we're seeing movements by politicians influenced by the pharmaceutical industry to mandate vaccinations for children, whether the parents of those children want to vaccinate them or not. And I understand from speaking, because I've got my sources obviously as a presenter, as a journalist, and I know people who work in the NHS and I know people who work elsewhere, and they say that, yes, they are going to start putting enormous pressure on those parents who don't believe in vaccination, who want their children to grow up naturally and to develop the bugs and the things that they get. This is a big worry for a lot of parents. A lot of people who listen to this particular programme, because it's an independent radio show, it's alternative news, they would be of a mind not to vaccinate their children. And we understand that this is going to be one of the new means by which social services say to parents, you're endangering your child because you won't vaccinate your child against the mumps or the measles or whatever. What do you think of that? That's very serious, that.
Well, I agree with the parents who protest. I mean, I have my own children vaccinated, but if somebody doesn't want to do it, they shouldn't be compelled to do it. But the way to deal with social workers, I haven't talked about that, so I will while I can, is to ignore them. Never open the door, never let them in, never talk to them. The only words you should say to social workers are, I'm very sorry, always apologise, I'm very sorry, but I've been advised not to speak to you. Good afternoon. That is what should be done. Never tell them anything. Anything you say will be taken down and not used in evidence against you, but will be used against you and twisted. Ignore social workers. Do not let them become part of your life. It's a spider's web. If you get caught up in the edge of the spider's web, you'll be sucked into the middle and swallowed.
But what about when they come back with the police, Ian?
If they come back with the police, you let the police in the house, yes. But they'll only come in once to see that everything's all right. They might. Then that's fine, because you don't want to make an enemy of the police if you can help it. I mean, my case is that child cruelty should be left to the police, like it always was before social workers began in 1948. Child cruelty, police understand criminal behaviour, and you shouldn't make an enemy of them, even though they do work with social services, because they're made to, because they're told to. But
can I just say this, by the way, this is serious. Leonardo, who's the father of baby Santiago, he's tweeted the programme to say that this is a business, because the judge in their particular case who made the order for the child to be taken, the judge's family, he alleges that the judge's wife is a social worker and works for social services. Now, I'm not going to name the judge in the interest, basically because he isn't here to defend himself. But if that is true, that's a disgrace beyond anything I've ever come across.
Oh, it's quite common, but I mean, you won't find the judge himself as a director of the company or involved, but his wife, his cousin, his brothers, his sisters, they will be, and he will say, well, that's not me. If anybody did tackle it, I mean, but nobody even really dares go into that. No, I mean, it's not a conspiracy. It's just a general. We'll all help ourselves to what we can get while we can get it, and that's it. And the more control the state has over the family, the more control that politicians have over you, because lots of them view the family as a sort of enemy, because nearly everybody owes their first loyalty to their family before any loyalty to their country or political party. And therefore it's a sort of rival. And, it's loosened by the actions of these social workers. But it can be changed, and I think it probably will be, as long as you don't punish law-abiding people. You abolish forced adoption. I, by the way, invented that term, forced adoption, back in 2002 or 3, because it's not the same as taking children without parental consent. Taking children without parental consent, you can take them when the parents agree, finally, or if a baby's left on the church steps. But forced adoption is what I would call contested. When it's contested in court, if the parents love their children enough to go through nasty court proceedings in desperation to try and keep them, they should never lose them. But they nearly always do. Only 1 in 400 care orders are refused. 1 in 400. Criminal cases, it's about 50-50, guilty or innocent.
This is the biggest scandal. This is the biggest scandal of all time, Ian, isn't it? I mean, we know that there's a massive VIP paedophile ring that's been operating in Westminster for years and elsewhere, and they're trying to keep a lid on that. It's disgusting. But this is like, we have listeners all over the world. We're going out on several different platforms, and I'm getting emails now and tweets from people who just don't want to believe that it's possible that this could be happening to people.
Look, Maggie Mellon, I say the vice chair of the Association of Social Workers, another statistic she brought was that now it's got so that 1 in 20, that's 5%, 1 in 20 families in the UK have been investigated or under investigation by social services. That's a pretty good figure. It's not mine.
Yeah.
The chief social worker who's saying that. I mean, that's 1 in 20, for goodness sake.
Imagine then, if the Named Person Act is, it is going to come in August. It won't be long before they start talking about it here in the United Kingdom. People are being targeted because they have alternative lifestyles. And by alternative lifestyles, we don't mean that they're druggies, but people who they might have, they might be New Age people, they might believe a different religion. These people are being targeted, Ian. They're being targeted because they're a soft touch.
Well, it's true. I mean, and it's strange. I mean, there's this judge. One case which was in the newspapers, they told the husband, who was Catholic, I think, and his wife was Christian but turned Muslim, and they split up. He was told he must, when he had his child come to stay with him, and she had full custody, but he had the visiting rights of the children coming, he must never take the child into any Christian building, not even a leisure centre for a swim.
Wow.
I mean, that, if it had been the other way around, I think there'd be a bit more uproar. But I mean, it's sort of, it's difficult to understand. I mean, it affects everybody, though. I mean, it affects Muslims, it affects people of all religions and none. Once they target a child, they want to get hold of it, but they don't want kids like Baby P who were beaten up because they're bad adoption material. So kids like Daniel Pelker and Baby P and the others are left to die. They want nice children for adoptions, and it's got to be stopped. I mean, forced adoption is a complete disgrace. Again, the UK is the only country in the world, not the only one that has forced adoption, the only one in Europe that has forced adoption, the only one in the world where every major city, or even minor city, has courts filled to bulging with parents trying to keep their children. Family courts with queues and the overloads, all on the case of parents having their children taken and desperately trying to keep them. I mean, no other country has that. It's something peculiar to the UK, and why it's sort of only the UK, I don't quite know. It's just so. I mean, I'm very much so much libertarian. People, if you don't hurt anyone else, you should be free to do what you like and live how you like and believe what you like.
I tell you what, Ian,
that's what social workers think.
That's as good as any place to leave it, because we're just out on time or out of time. I want again to thank you for the work you've done. Anytime I speak with you, I get a number of anonymous messages from people who say that they were helped out by you and that they wouldn't have their child with them, their young boy, their young girl, if it wasn't for you. That's a wonderful thing to hear that. Go to forced-adoption.com. It's the greatest scandal in the world. Take his advice, Ian Josephs. Go to your local MP's surgery and tell him or her you will not live in a country where this goes on. Make them ask questions in Parliament. Yeah. Simple as that. It's got to be done. I'll give you the last word, my friend. We've got about 30 seconds and then we'll part company, but I want to thank you again for your time.
Yeah, my last word is with social workers: ignore them, don't cooperate with them, don't let them in the house, fight every step of the way, never admit anything. Some people admit things, but if you're selling a second-hand car, you don't point out all the faults to the buyer. Well, the same thing here. Don't admit anything to your enemies. They'll use it against you. Fight every step. Resist adoption, resist care, resist not being allowed to see your children, apply for contact. Act on your own, not with legal aid solicitors who tell you to cooperate with your enemies. If you cooperate with the enemies, you lose the war. Winston Churchill didn't cooperate with Hitler. Barack Obama didn't cooperate with Osama bin Laden, and he sent someone over and had him shot. You don't cooperate with the people who are your enemies. It's unreasonable of a judge to tell you to do that, because once a social worker says we're going to take your child, he or she is the worst enemy you've got. So you have to fight every step of the way and get advice from people like myself, but there are plenty of others. There's Christopher Booker of the Telegraph, Sue Reed of the Mail, and there are people with websites, the Association of Mackenzie Friends. There's Maggie Tuttle's Children Screaming to Be Heard. That they had a big meeting. I went up to London to speak out last week. You know, there's lots of people who think the same way that I do. I'm not just a lone voice in the wilderness. And have a look, if you do look at my website, of the 3 videos at the beginning, one by the BBC, one by ITV, and one by Channel 4, all criticising the system. One of them is horrific. It begins with a woman screaming as a newborn baby is wrenched from her arms.
Yeah, I've seen it.
They're worth looking at.
They are worth looking at. Ian, Godspeed to you and everything you do and all those who work with you. Thanks very much for coming on, and we'll stay in touch with you. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Richie, for giving me the time. All the best.
Not at all. You can come back anytime you want. You have an open door, Ian. Thank you.